And this is our last session of track 2, but we have Michelle Frechette. Michelle is the Director of Community Engagement for Stellar WP at Liquid Web. Michelle was called the busiest woman in WordPress by Matt Mullenweg at WordCamp US 2022, and she is that. We are so grateful that Michelle is here and a big part of Stellar's success. She is a big part of Stellar's success. In addition to her work at Stellar WP, Michelle is the podcast barista at WPCoffeeTalk.com, co-founder of underrepresentedintech.com and creator of WPCareerPages.com. So she is busy, as you can tell. She's also the president of the board for BigOrangeHeart.org, director of community relations and contributor at poststatus.com, co-host of the WP Motive podcast, author, business coach, and a frequent organizer and speaker at WordPress events. Michelle lives outside of Rochester, New York, where she's an avid nature photographer. You can learn more about Michelle at meetmichelle.online. And here she is. Hello, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good, Hannah. How are you?
I'm good. I feel like we've run in a lot of the same streams, but we haven't gotten to interact very much, which makes me so sad. Kathy talks so highly of you, and obviously your name and face is just everywhere. So it's super fun to get to introduce you today and to hear what you have to share with us.
Well, she speaks highly of you as well, so it's really nice to share a screen with you today.
Yeah, Kathy and I keep each other sane. We have fun.
Absolutely.
Ben just goes along with what we say and do.
I mean, that's his job, so it's all good.
It's true. It's true. Well, cool. I'm going to turn everything over to you. And then at the end, if there's questions, we'll add them on the screen. But let me know if you need anything.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here today talking about launching a podcast. So if launching a podcast is something you've ever thought about, I have a lot of things that I'd like to share with you about how I was able to do that. So let me tell you how it first began. It was May of 2019, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder what it would be like to learn to podcast. I had, up until 2018, been freelancing for years and always hoped that one of my clients would want to learn how to do podcasting so that I would kind of be forced into it. But since nobody did, I thought, well, let me at least learn how to do it myself. And so I thought, well, what would be good to do is like stay in WordPress. WordPress is my place, my space. And I didn't necessarily have enough content to want to share my own thoughts on such a regular basis, but I thought it would be really cool to meet other people in WordPress. And so I thought of WP Coffee Talk. Now, at the time, I had just learned to drink coffee. I was in my late 40s, early 50s, I guess in my 50s. I was 51 years old, and I had never really been a coffee drinker, but Coffee Talk seemed much better than like Tea Talk. So I decided, let's try WP Coffee Talk. Maybe I'll get a few episodes. It will die a painful death. A lot of people think they're going to want to be podcasters. Just like blogging, you write 4 or 5, you create 4 or 5 episodes, and then you kind of stall out and don't know what you're going to do next. So I thought it might just kind of die a painful death. Maybe nobody will want to see it or hear it. Who would even want to be on it? Who would want to come talk to me in WordPress? I decided, okay, let's try this thing. I built a website. I launched on a Friday, and as an afterthought, the next morning thought, gosh, I guess I should have a social media channel for this. So I created WP Coffee Talk on Twitter. I tweeted it out from my own brand. I tweeted it out from there, and I went to bed. By Monday morning, I had a lot of people who wanted to be on the show, and I was like, wow, this thing might actually have something like some legs to it, and this might actually go someplace. That was June 2019. I now have over 150 episodes recorded, 122 published, probably closer to 200 recorded. I have a whole bunch that are going to be released very soon. I finally got an assistant who's going to help me get them all on the air. So what did I learn in all of that? Well, let me tell you, the first thing I did was create a website and start a podcast without knowing anything about what you should do to create a podcast. And so I learned on the go, and I lucked myself into some level of success. I created WP Coffee Talk, where I get to talk to people in the WordPress community all over the world. So I usually start by saying, welcome to the next episode of WP Coffee Talk. And to this point in time, I have spoken literally to people on every continent except Antarctica. So if you know somebody down there, hook me up, because it'll be fun to say that I've talked to people on all the continents. The format that I created for WP Coffee Talk was about 40 minutes. So it's a 40-minute conversation. There's a lot of questions that I do. I've spoken to people anywhere and anyone in the WordPress community for any company, whether they were well-known or almost unknown. And every single person that I interview on WP Coffee Talk gets asked the same exact set of questions. So whether you just started your own website for your small company or blog, or you're Matt Mullenweg, I've asked you the same set of questions. I think of it as kind of like the great equalizer, because everybody has different answers to those questions. And no matter if you're somebody who has years and years in WordPress or just starting out, you have something to share that other people can learn about. So, as I said, everyone gets asked the same set of questions, and almost anything goes. I do try to keep it a modicum of class to the whole thing. But I will say, I do reserve the right not to publish any episodes that I've recorded. And that's because sometimes people can absolutely be all about trying to push their product, in which case nobody's going to want to hear that, and I'm going to lose some credibility for my podcast. And sometimes there have been people who had so many interruptions, their children walk in, their phone is ringing, and they are stopping the podcast to deal with things that are not part of the conversation we're having, that it made it almost impossible to edit. And at that point, I thought, if it's not your priority, it's also not going to be mine. And so I didn't publish that episode either. By and large, I think all but 2 episodes have been published over the years. So yeah, it works pretty well. My takeaways from years of doing this now is that people love to talk about themselves, right? You ask a question, people like to answer you, and it makes it super easy. Usually you don't get a lot of introverts that want to be on a podcast. So that does make it a little bit easier. And I always send the questions in advance, so people have an opportunity to read them over and know what they're going to be talking about. However, as you see on the screen, most people haven't read the questions in advance, even though I've given them to them several times. And I will honestly say a lot of guests have never even listened to an episode of the podcast before they ask to be on it. So it can make it a little bit challenging. I always schedule in a little bit of extra time at the beginning of the time that I talk to somebody. I schedule an hour to meet with them and record the podcast. And it's usually about 35 to 40 minutes of actually recording time, because I go over things with them at the beginning. I make sure that they're comfortable with the questions. They have answers in mind so that we get there. It's not just awkward silence and things like that. And have an opportunity to feel comfortable about podcasting. A lot of people that I've met with, it's their first time ever guesting on a podcast. And so I walk through processes with them and help them feel at ease. I will say international scheduling has been painful because time zones are difficult. So when it comes to me setting out a schedule for people to meet with me, I make sure I have times that are not only in my evenings here, and I'm in the eastern part of the United States, but I also will schedule times on Saturday mornings, so that if somebody is on the other side of the world, it gives them an opportunity to actually meet, not have to get up in the middle of the night to work with me. By and large, people are generous and kind. They're generous with their time. They're generous with their sponsorships. They're generous with their tips. And we'll get into a little bit of that as we go through. And then the last thing is, rendering video can be a very time-consuming process. But we are going to talk about equipment, and we're going to talk about software as I start to share some of my ideas and advice with you. So the first piece of advice I have for you is, you want to have a podcast. Determine what the format of your podcast is. Is it going to be like WP Coffee Talk, where you are doing an interview style? Is it going to be multi-host dialogue? So I also co-host a podcast called Underrepresented in Tech with Allie Nimmons, and it's the 2 of us having a conversation every week. Kathy Zant and I have a podcast called WP Motivate, and it's the 2 of us having a conversation every week. So you have to think about how that's going to work. if it's going to be interview style, if it's going to be multi-host dialogue, single host dialogue, like Adam Silver with Kitchen Sink WP, most of the time he is sharing with you his thoughts on things. He's reviewing products, he's doing things like that, but it's just him. If that's the way you want to do your podcast, that's great too. You can do product review. You can do topical. There are people who have, there's like Do the Woo, which is about WooCommerce and e-commerce in the system. So whatever it is, think in advance about what it is and how you'd like your format to be. And then if you choose interview format, let's talk a little bit about what that would look like. So make it easy for people to find you and ask to be on the show. So if you were to go to WPCoffeeTalk.com, you will see a link. I think it says Spill the Beans or Be on the Show. And so there's an interest form that people can fill out that says, I'm interested in being on your podcast. Now, we are all in the web business. We know that those forms get spammed a lot. So that is not the link to actually sign up to be on the show. So I do a vetting process. You have to go through that form first. I will read it. And if I know you're a real person with really good intentions, I will contact you again with a link back to the website, a hidden link that has all the information and a way to schedule to be on the show. I send that separately. So don't make it super easy for people to sign up, but make it very easy for them to give interest. Alternatively, also, I often ask people. So especially in the early days, if I was starting to dwindle on the number of episodes I'd recorded, I would reach out to people in the community. I would reach out to people in my local community and in the global community and say, hey, would you consider being a guest on the podcast? So there's lots of ways that you can get content for your podcast. And then prepare your guests as much as possible. So I have a page on that site. The page that they sign up on also gives the questions. It gives the format that I use. It gives a lot of information before they even get to the link at the bottom, excuse me, to actually schedule on my calendar. I want to make it as simple as possible. And the people who do read it find it incredibly helpful, and it takes away a lot of the anxiety about being on a podcast with somebody. I also send them reminders, and in those reminders, they get the questions again. So there's very little reason not to read those if you're worried about what might be asked and what's on the show. And then I send it again, like the day before, they get a reminder. It's all through Calendly, so they get those prompts, those reminders to be able to know what's coming and kind of be prepared and not forget that they signed up for a time with me. I also ask in advance if they have any questions. I'll open dialogue with people, make sure that they feel comfortable with everything that's going on, ask if they have any questions about being on the show or what the format might look like. I ask them on that page of information to make sure that they have a quiet place that they can do. If they have an external microphone, please use it. If they have headphones, please use them, and to try to use the highest quality video camera that they can. I will say I have had guests that are using their cell phone, and that's fine. Whatever they can do, as long as I can hear them and they can be heard in the recording. But obviously, the higher quality, the better, and the more likely that people will continue to listen through the whole episode. And then I get as much information about them as possible via the intake form. When I first started, I would send a thank you email that asked them to fill in a bunch of blanks, such as like their website, their WordPress.org handle, their social media handles, things like that. Now I ask that on the intake form because the fewer times I have to ask them for information, the easier it is for them to actually process it. So make it as simple as possible to make your job as simple as possible. Now, if you choose a multi-host dialogue, which is what I have in the other podcast that I do with Kathy and with Allie, for example, determine your topics in advance whenever possible. So take underrepresented-in-tech.com with Allie, for example. She and I will text each other through the week and say, what do you think of this topic or what do you think about that topic? So that when we actually meet to do our recording, we have an idea of what it is we want to talk about. We may have done a little bit of web research to see what's going on in the world around that topic so that we can present it intelligently. Before we actually start recording, we will actually talk about some of that as well. We'll determine who's going to lead the conversation. So, for example, if it was my idea, if the topic that week was my idea, I will probably lead the conversation, and then Allie will come in with her ideas as well, or vice versa. And we do a pretty good job of kind of going back and forth every week about how we're going to do that and who's going to lead the conversation. But also, don't spend a lot of time discussing the topic before you start recording, because you'll actually wear out your excitement for it. So it's exciting to have that conversation. It's not exciting to have the conversation twice in a row in 20 minutes. So get your main talking points out, get those logistics worked out about who's going to talk about what, but save the actual conversation around the topic for when you're recording, because it'll be much fresher and much more interesting to listen to if you're not rehashing a conversation that you just had. If you choose single host dialogue, keep your research in advance, do your research in advance. Whatever it is you want to talk about, make sure that you are as up to date as possible on what that topic is. Keep an eye on the clock so that you don't run over, or you're not too short either. So if you normally have a 20-minute podcast, make sure it's around 20 minutes, never less than 15 minutes and never more than 30, because people expect consistency from you. And don't fret over how you sound or any verbal noises. Like I have a frog in my throat today because it's spring and my allergies are acting up. I'm not muting myself. I'm not stepping away just because I have to clear my throat. People expect that. We actually don't hear that noise a lot when we listen to things unless it's really pervasive. I once recorded a webinar about fundraising, and halfway through I sneezed, but I was on a roll. So I just kept going because I thought, people sneeze. It's not bad to hear a sneeze. Now, if video, it's harder to edit those kinds of things out of video. It's much easier to edit that out and have continuity if you're just doing an audio podcast. But does it really matter? Maybe to you it does. You can edit it out. Honestly, I think that we're all humans and we can hear somebody sneeze every once in a while. It's also important not only to determine the format, but to determine the frequency. Are you going to do a weekly podcast? Are you going to do a monthly podcast? How often are you going to be doing that? And then think about all those times that maybe you thought about blogging something. Do you have enough information, enough ideas, enough topics to continue through at the rate that you have said you wanted to do it? So if I say I'm going to podcast weekly, what does that mean? That means I have to talk about something new around my major subject area every single time I get on the air. So do I have enough to do that? Do I have 4 hours worth? Great. If I have 4 hours worth, that could get me through maybe 2 months. If I have 4 hours worth and I'm doing a weekly podcast, that's not going to go as far as if I have 4 hours worth and I'm doing a monthly podcast. So think about your topic. Make sure that it's something you can continue to be passionate about for a long time. Or say this is going to be a year in the life of podcasts, and when I finish, I finish. But it's okay occasionally to miss. So when we were in Bangkok, Thailand for WordCamp Asia, we missed a week of podcasting. And Kathy and I with WP Motivate, we missed 3 weeks. And it's not the end of the world, because people expect that life happens. You are not beholden to your audience to never have emergencies or to never have things come up or to not take a vacation. Make sure that you are actually enjoying it and that you don't become so beholden to your own project that you start to resent it. And it's okay to stray from your format once in a while. So I mentioned Adam Silver at Kitchen Sink WP. He has a single person dialogue, single host dialogue. However, on occasion, he'll invite a guest and do an interview, or he'll invite somebody who's got a product to talk about their product. So it's okay to stray from your own format every once in a while in order to have fun with it, and because you think of something that you'd like to share through your platform. Now, getting to the equipment part of things, it is really okay if you can't afford top-of-the-line equipment at first. If you can't afford a top-of-the-line camera, you can't afford top-of-the-line microphone, start with what you have. If you are podcasting from your phone and that's the best you have, but you want to start and you want to get out there, do it. Don't let those kinds of things hold you back. As you grow, as you maybe get sponsorship, as you are able to upgrade your equipment. I started with a very low quality microphone. And then I upgraded to a Yeti microphone. So on my desk at my office, I have a Yeti microphone. On my desk here in my home office, I have a Shure microphone. They're both very good microphones, and they work really well for podcasting. My first podcasting was done through the built-in camera on my MacBook, which I thought was fine until I upgraded to a Logitech, and now I have much clearer. And then I added lights, and so you see my face much better. So I was able to, over time, upgrade my equipment. But I started out with the bare minimum, and people still wanted to be on the show. People still listened, and people still watched the YouTube channel. And if you're using a computer that has capacity to process sound and video quickly, I highly recommend it. My old laptop, it took me 8 hours to render video for a 40 to 45-minute podcast. It was excruciating, and it almost deflated my wanting to continue forward. But I upgraded to a MacBook Pro with much faster capacity, and now it doesn't take me nearly as long to do that. It's probably about 20 minutes to render a 45-minute video, if that. So as you grow, do better, but start with what you have. The same is true for your software. So a lot of us have MacBooks. If you don't have MacBook, there's other things that are similar to you. MacBook usually comes with GarageBand and I can't remember what they call it, iMovie, I think, for video processing. I don't use those. I never really got the hang of GarageBand. I was very frustrated by it. I never really got the hang of iMovie. However, I learned Adobe Rush for video processing, and that works very well for me. And Audacity, which I think is audacity.com, is free for rendering audio. You can record right through it. You can create your bumpers, which are your intros and your outros, and then anything in between. And you can edit your audio. You can edit out sounds in there. It's really good editing software, and it's free, and it works really well. So use what you can. Again, upgrade as you have the opportunity. So I like to say prepare for disaster, but prepare more for success. I literally thought my first podcast was going to tank. I didn't think anybody would listen to it, much less want to be part of it. But before very long, I was having to juggle calendar and figure out how many episodes I could record a week and still maintain my work and still maintain my sanity. So whereas I started out with an open calendar for I think 4 nights a week and all day, like 5 hours on Saturday, I quickly pulled that back to 2 nights a week and just Saturday morning. And then I quickly pulled that back to just 1 night a week and Saturday morning. And if somebody is not able to make either of those times, of course, I'll work with them to find another time on the calendar. But I don't leave a whole wide open calendar anymore because, again, I was beholden to the podcast and I didn't want to resent it. I wanted it to be something that I could manage and continue to have passion around. I didn't expect it to take off. Like I said, I launched on Friday. I added Twitter as an afterthought. I'd hoped that I would get somebody that might want to be on it. And by Monday morning, when I actually checked my email, I had 12 people already signed up to be on the podcast, and all 12 of them recorded with me. And that gave me 3 months worth of content when I was publishing on a weekly basis. So be prepared because you may be wildly successful. Now, a lot of people look at podcasting for monetization. I honestly didn't start it that way. I didn't even have a way for people to sponsor at first. That was something I added afterwards because people started asking me about it. So I would say right from the start, make sure you have a way that people can sponsor your podcast if you're looking to monetize it at all. You don't have to. You can simply do it because you enjoy doing it. But if you do want to monetize, I'll give you some ideas for how to do that. The first is ask for sponsors. So create the page on your website that allows people to give you either to sponsor it directly or, again, to have that double like interest form, and then you send them another form to be able to sponsor your podcast. But also post about it on social media. Give people the opportunity. Make sure you thank your sponsors publicly. Thank them on the episodes so that they are getting something, an ROI for the money that they are spending with you. And then do direct asks. There's a lot of no's, but there are some yeses too. So go ask people that are different companies in your industry, whether you're in WordPress or you are building websites in a different industry. Ask for those people if they're interested in sponsoring. the worst thing that can happen is they say no thank you. And the best thing that can happen is they give you money for you to do the thing that you're passionate about. The other thing I thought of to do, and I see a lot of people do this, very similar to doing like Patreon, is to have a tip jar on your website. So I have a tip jar, and I don't get a lot of money through there, but over the years, I've got about $500. That was $500 more than I had if I didn't put a tip jar on my site. So people want to thank you. They want to be part of your success. And sometimes it's $5, sometimes it's $100, but there are people who will want to patronize and be a patron of your podcast. So give them an opportunity to do that. And then the other thing I do is I do have affiliates. So, my hosting is, I have an affiliate account for my hosting. I have an affiliate account for the forms plugins I use. Put up an affiliate links page because, if you make a sale through those, there's a little bit more money too. So give yourself an opportunity to earn money through that if you want to. There are some ways that you can do that. And then get the word out. Absolutely build social links. So as soon as we created WP Motivate, we created a Twitter account that goes with it. We tweet out from there. We tag Kathy, we tag me, and then the two of us tweeted out again to our followers. So we were slowly building the @WP Motivate account so that people are following the podcast directly. But we couldn't do that if we didn't start the account to begin with. So build out your social links. Not just to put your episodes out there for the world, but also engage with the followers too. So if people are tweeting something or they're posting on Facebook or wherever you're posting to, engage with that. Make sure that you become relevant in the community that you are part of so that people will want to engage with you. And then they will see more about what it is that you're posting. Get involved in those industry conversations. And don't expect that your followers are just going to happen. Right. So as soon as I created an account for WP Motivate, I went through and followed not all of my friends, but a lot of my friends, and encouraged Kathy to do the same so that people who know us and want to support us would start following that and help us start to build the algorithm as well. If you're building a podcast that is industry related, send out a press release, whether it's official or not. There are newsletters in your community who will write about it. So, or at very least, include it as a link in a quick links on their newsletters. So, but if they might not know about it unless you share that with them. So make sure that you get the information out to news sources in the industry as well. If you're in Slack channels, post about it in Slack. I do that frequently because it's a great way to share things. And it's exciting to be able to share, especially if you're doing an interview show, to give credit to the person who came and spent time with you on the podcast. Tag creators carefully, usually people who've been in the show or who have interacted with you before. I never cold tag anybody in Twitter or any other social media because it's kind of a rude way to do that. But if there's people that are interacting with you, if you have a question, if you can tag them thoughtfully, that's a great way to interact as well. And then just do your outreach, talk to people, make sure people know. I actually have business cards. I know. Printed business cards in today's day and age, but I bring them with me and I hand them out to people so that they won't forget that they might want to be on my podcast with me. So it's just another way to put something in people's hands. I created stickers and I give them out at WordCamps and other events. And so I've got stickers that say WP Coffee Talk. I've got a sticker of me holding a mug. It's actually a wapoo of me holding a mug with the WP Coffee Talk logo on it. So I give out those stickers as well. Everybody likes a good sticker for their laptop. And so that's just another way to remind people frequently of who you are. And then learn how to podcast. It's not something that we just sit down and know how to do. One of the best ways to do is listen to other podcasts, listen to different kinds of podcasts, pay attention to what you like about those, and then implement that. So I had been a guest on a few podcasts, and I liked how certain podcasts did different things. So the intake, for example, on one podcast was stellar. And so I took that, modified it for myself, and like they did that well, I'm going to do it too. And then there were other people who like wrote thank you notes and sent out thank you notes afterwards. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do thank you notes. And so I took the best of all the worlds from the things that I saw and heard through podcasting and applied them into my own podcast so that I created my own experience for people who were either guesting on the show or even listening to the show, so that they knew what to expect from Michelle and WP Coffee Talk. People know what to expect from me and Allie. They know that as soon as they start that podcast, they're going to hear me say, "Hi, Allie," in my little sing-songy voice. There are little things we do that actually become part of the fabric of the podcast that we create. You can take classes on podcasting. There's classes everywhere. There's classes probably Udemy and other places. There are classes through Joe Casabona. I highly recommend Joe. Joe is a seasoned, amazing podcaster. I'll post on my Twitter account later a link to some of his stuff. So if you're following, you can find that there, or just search him, Joe Casabona. He's the epitome of good courses in how to do podcasting. Also, ask help from friends and colleagues who are already doing podcasts. Pick their brains. Ask them what works. What did they wish they knew when they started? What made them decide to start a podcast? Well, how much time does it take? What is editing like for them? Ask those questions that you want to know more about, so that you're not necessarily going into it without any kind of forethought and without understanding what the true expectation of your time and your resources might be. And then read up about it. There's a ton of blog posts out there on podcasting. If you type in how to podcast, you will find so many resources for yourself. So absolutely do some research, learn about how to podcasting. Don't do it the way I did. It was so hard. I wish that I'd taken those classes before. I wish that I'd done more than just listen and guest on shows. It was fine. It worked, but I could have made my life a lot easier if I had done it a little bit differently. And so my advice to you is, don't do what I did. Do as I'm telling you now. And then the biggest piece of advice of all is have fun. Don't do it for the money. It really takes a while to get to that. I didn't have sponsors right away, and I'm not making enough money to quit my day job in podcast sponsorships. I make some vacation money. I make some Christmas money, and it's a really good thing. And I actually pay for the resources that I use out of that, and not out of my own resources. And know also that the money that you bring in through that is taxable income. So whatever you're putting out there, you also have to make accommodations for. So don't do it for the money, because that is going to take a little while to grow. Also, don't do it for the glory, because that takes time too. So it's not like you just build a podcast and suddenly you have 100,000 listeners every time. It does take a while for the wheels on that train to get moving and the motion to go forward. So yes, you can absolutely find fame and fortune in podcasting, but not on day one. And then don't do it because you think you should. Like, nobody should do a podcast because they think they should have a podcast. It's not really a good reason, because you're not going to enjoy it. Do it because you have a passion to share information about your topic, to share information about your community, to share information about other people, because that is what's going to make you want to do it and do it regularly. And then one piece of advice I forgot to put down here and I thought of, because it was like one of those no-brainers that I didn't even think to include it. So 1 minute before we came on to the show today, I wrote down a note in front of myself and said, build a website for your podcast. A lot of podcasts only have their podcasts through where they aggregate out to. So like, you can find my podcasts on Apple Podcasts. You can find them on Podbean. But you go to my website and you're going to get the show notes, you're going to get transcripts, you're going to get all of the information that you might want right through the website. You can listen to it right there, or you can click out to the other podcast aggregators as well. But if you have a website, you have staked your claim on that name as well, and registered the domain that matches your podcast so nobody else can get it. At the very least. But it also gives you an avenue to be able to get people to sign up. It gives you an avenue to do the fundraising, sponsorships, things like that. So absolutely build yourself a website for that. That's the information I have for you today. I think we have some comments and questions. I do want to share with you, there's the screenshot, right? Or the last screen here has all the different podcasts that I have going right now. Also, at Michelle Ames is my Twitter handle. My DMs are open, so I'm always happy to serve as a resource. And that's my email address too. So if you have questions later, I would love to answer them for you. If you think of things after the fact, you can find me in a lot of different Slack channels, and you can email me. I'm always happy to serve as a resource. And I also will tweet these slides out after the event today. So, Hannah, do we have questions?
Yes, we do. Yeah, I'll post them
Awesome.
in. Here's a question from Joel. He said,
Great.
I do video logs on YouTube, including interviews on my niche. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, so vlogs on YouTube is kind of, in my opinion, kind of like a visual podcast, right? So if you treat it like that, then you can actually grow. So for WP Motivate and for WP Coffee Talk and my newest podcast, Audacity Marketing, we have YouTube channels as well as having the audio out on podcasting. And so you actually grow a different audience in different places, but still answer the same questions for those people. So I think it's great if you treat your vlog like a podcast and do those same kind of marketing and the techniques that I shared with you earlier, because you will grow your audience there as well. I think it's a great way to do it. I have for a while, I had more followers on YouTube and more downloads on YouTube than I did through podcasting. So it really depends on where your audience lives and what they want to do and what they want to see. Absolutely.
That's good. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
Here's another one from Joe. He says, hey, Michelle, great presentation. Question, is there a guest you'd like to have but haven't had the opportunity to talk with?
Yes, I absolutely want to get Mike Little on my show, the co-founder of WordPress. I think the work that he does for education and underrepresentation is phenomenal. I would love to have him on WP Coffee Talk and Allie, and I would love to have him on the Underrepresented in Tech show. So if anybody has connections to Mike Little, ask him for us. We really would love to have him on the show and talk to him about all the wonderful work that he does in education and underrepresentation.
Let me know when that happens. That'd be a great episode.
Oh, for sure. Oh, the other thing is, so my daughter is a biracial woman who works in underrepresentation in her bank. So she is the vice president of the African American Resource Group for the bank, national bank that she works at. And I've been bugging her for years to come on the Underrepresented Tech podcast. So if anybody knows my daughter, put a little pressure on her too. Mom's not cutting it.
Shoot. That's funny. All right, I'll ping her.
There you go.
And then Joe has one other question. He said, was there a specific point when your podcast audience spiked/grew? And was it the guest or that the audience grew consistently over time?
Yeah, so the audience did grow consistently over time. And I will be honest and say that I had, through part of the pandemic, I had some mental well-being issues, right? So I was single, living home alone during a pandemic, and the anxiety and depression kind of kicked in. And so WP Coffee Talk kind of took a back burner, and it's been a little dormant for a while. So if you go and look, you're going to be like, what's she talking about? She hasn't done anything in a while. I still have a lot of episodes to put out there, which is why I've hired somebody to help me do that. And so it has waned a little bit, but even so, it was named like the 4th most popular WordPress podcast in one of the recent surveys that one of the newsletters did. So it still has some legs on it. Yeah. I will say the single most watched episode is absolutely the episode where I interviewed Matt Mullenweg. And so that really kind of boosted the following as well. But just consistency over time has helped all of the other podcasts and all the other things that I do grow. Cool. Great questions, Joe.
Yeah.
I think Joe's playing Stump Michelle. He's got a lot of good ones.
Yeah, he's been around a lot today. Thanks, Joe, for your contributions today. It's super great.
He's awesome. Oh, I see Joel has another question about the guitars.
Yes. Well, it's funny because we had Jake in here earlier today, and he has guitars in the back of his. It does seem
okay. So there's a funny story with the guitars, Joel. So let me share a little bit. Every time I've interviewed developers, especially on my podcast, they have guitars on the wall behind them or up against the wall behind them. So I was like, a couple years ago, I built my first plugin. It's in the repository. It's very simple. I just forked Hello Dolly and created Hello Beautiful. But I was like, does this make me a developer now? Technically, it kind of does, right? Very shallowly. last year my dad passed away, and he had all of these guitars that I used to play back in the day. And so I thought, I'm going to put those guitars on the wall. Number one, because it makes me feel closer to my dad, but also because I'm a real developer now. I have guitars on the wall.
I love that.
So that's the story of my guitars.
I give my roommate a hard time. She's not a developer and she doesn't play the guitar, but she has guitars behind her. She works from home as well. And I'm always like, why do you have those? But I feel like you have liberty to have them behind you. Like, those are very good excuses.
This one on the end here is the one that I learned to play on when I was 15, I think. So yeah. So I have a history with them for sure. Yeah. But this has been awesome. Hannah, you podcast, right? You're part of the Cadence Beat.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to talk about that. Ben, Kathy, and I do. Oh, sorry. I think it just broke up for a second. So Ben, Kathy, and I do the Cadence Beat. And when Ben approached me like a year ago, I guess maybe a year and a half ago now, he was like, hey, Kathy wants to start a podcast. And I was like, I kind of laughed. I was like, what would we talk about? And who would listen? And and so we kind of went into it, just like, we'll just see what happens. And it's been really fun. And honestly, all of your tips and advice are like, I'm like, I can tell that Kathy hangs out with you and obviously does a podcast with you, because a lot of those things we've also implemented, and it's been fun. And most of the time it's like, we'll get in, spend about 5 minutes talking about what we're going to talk about, and then we just dive in, and it's like, let's just have this conversation. And that's all you're really doing, is just having conversation. And it is amazing how people like to listen to that. I'm always surprised when people listen and comment on our podcast. I'm like, wow, people like us.
I love it. Little known fact, I actually named your podcast.
I heard that. Actually, I did know that. I love that. The Cadence Beat. Yeah. Thanks to Michelle. So
there you go. You guys do a wonderful job with it. And it is true, though. Like I said, you don't want to wear out the conversation about your topic talking about what you're going to talk about, because then it's like,
we've done that a few times.
And it doesn't feel as authentic.
Yeah. And then
so you want to make sure that
you just said all of this, so it's not as exciting. But so a lot of times Kathy's like, stop right now. We're just gonna hit play.
And that's how Kathy and I are. Every time we get ready to record WP Motivate, we start talking like, oh wait, this is good stuff. Let me hit record. Let's start. And then our signature thing, I like I said, for underrepresented in tech, is I always start with, hi Ellie, like this little sing-songy thing. If you listen to WP Motivate all the way to the end, I say like, thanks for listening. It's been great to see you. And then there's like this pause. And Kathy goes, bye. And that's like our thing for there. So I always laugh. I stop the recording. I'm like, I didn't think you were going to do it today. But it is a lot of fun.
Think of something cute for ours. That's really fun.
You gotta get a drum and go like the bum or something at the end.
Yeah.
But sure. Joe Simpson Jr. So Joe's been a guest on my podcast. Kathy's been a guest on the podcast on WP Coffee Talk. So, and I hope they had good experiences. We're still friends, so I think so. But
well, Joe's here today, so that says something. And Michelle talks about you all the time, or not Michelle, Kathy does. So.
Yeah, I love her too. So if anybody has any questions, find me. I'm always around in the community. If you're at a WordCamp or something, come up to me. Let's have a conversation. If you want to be on the show, I do have a few episodes to go through still, but would love to have you. And we would love to, at the very least, have you listen in and listen to me and Kathy on WPMotivate.com, because we have a lot of fun with it. And it's just, save us Cadence Beat. You guys are always laughing and having fun. I love it.
Yeah, it is fun.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. And it was great to have some FaceTime with you. And
absolutely.
Really appreciate
Thanks for having me. For sure. Thank you so much.
Bye.